My name is Magda El-Shubini, Middle East and Islamic Study Librarian at the Ohio State University Libraries. I wanted to welcome everyone to today's session devoted to the underrepresented minorities of Kuwait. The session will consist of a brief presentation followed by a discussion session. Today's presenter is Dr. Ebtehal Alkhateeb, Assistant Professor at Kuwait University. Our session moderator is Thomas Dickens, Assistant Dean for Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion, and Chief Diversity Officer at the Ohio State University. A few words of introduction of our speaker. Dr. Ebtehal Alkhateeb is Assistant Professor at Kuwait University, Department of English Language and Literature. Previously on the board of the Kuwaiti Human Rights Society, a member of a number of civil NGOs such as Women, Cultural, and Social Society. Dr. Alkhateeb is founding member of Sod Al-Kuwait, a pressure group that works to sustain the principles of the Kuwaiti Constitution in the society, and Group 29, a humanitarian group that works on a number of pressing humanitarian issues, mainly the issue of stateless in Kuwait. Without further ado, please welcome Dr. Ebtehal Alkhateeb.
I'm sorry, I'm trying to unmute myself. Thank you, glad to be here, and I really appreciate you hosting such an important seminar of such an important subject.
Yeah. Thank you for joining us, and so interested in seeing what you have to say about this topic about Bidoon and in Kuwait, and so after we hear what you share, we will get into a bit of a Q&A portion, because I know our participants who have joined will be curious to process some questions that they have on this topic.
Wonderful. Yeah, thank you for the opportunity once more. It's such an important and sensitive subject, particularly for Eastern societies, where these societies are very much highly patriarchal, deeply tribal, and the issues of bloodlines are really still going on strong, despite the fact that the Middle East and the East in general is now made, or both are now made of civil countries. It's important to point that statelessness is probably today the most dangerous human rights issue globally. So we have more than 12 million stateless and displaced people around the world. It's in no way a subject of second world, third world countries. It's not specific to certain areas of the world. You can find statelessness all around, and it's such a dire situation as people live in cracks between laws, between borders, and in such difficult and horrific and dangerous states, legally and socially and economically. The one thing, if we want to focus on particularly the Gulf, we would notice that statelessness that happened in the Gulf in a very different way than it happened all around the world. Most of statelessness today resulted from wars, from as a result of the First World War, Second World War, and the coining of the modern states all around the world. And so people who were migrating or people who were displaced, people who were on borders between two countries. Um, uh, there are varied situations through which people fell in the cracks and became stateless because as a result of these wars, particularly World War One and later World War Two, economic reasons played a role. For example, there was a high number of statelessness amongst the Germans because of the post-Nazi situation and what happened with those citizens who were scattered through Europe and so on and so forth. There are very clear cases of statelessness in Europe, still clear cases, even if less so, in the Americas, and of course, very different also situations of statelessness in East Asia, for example, in China, because of the situation that prohibits families from having more than one child for a time. A lot of families did not register the first child if it was a female because they wanted male children. And so China ended up with a number of stateless female Chinese citizens, supposedly. And of course, China took steps and corrected this. However, this is one of the strange reasons that it created statelessness, and such reasons you find all around the world, pinpointing the strangeness of our race, the strangeness of the way we think sometimes and evaluate each other as human beings. In the Gulf area, there was no war that caused statelessness. As a matter of fact, the situation was very different. Now, a lot of people in the Gulf area were nomads, so they moved around borders. Say, for example, if we're talking about my area, my country, Kuwait, it's bordered with Iran, Iraq, and Saudi Arabia. And so we had tribes moving around the desert of these borders. And for the longest time, they were moving freely. Wherever they landed, they were considered people of that area. When the time came for the coining of modern states and these countries started drawing their borders and creating nationalities, those nomadic people were still moving around. And a lot of them did not even understand the importance for applying for a nationality, did not think very much of it, did not think that the paper meant anything. In Kuwait, for example, we had several other interesting reasons, if I can call them interesting. Some of the residents in Kuwait at that time worked for KOC, which is Kuwait Oil Company. And Kuwait Oil Company at that time was at a distance from the main city of Kuwait, and people at that time called it traveling. I mean, today you drive 20 minutes to get there, but at that time it was a trip. And so a lot of people who were in that area of where the KOC company was, which is called Ahmadi, did not come to Kuwait to apply for nationality. And so, for example, we see high number of statelessness among people, residents of Ahmadi, because of such reason. There were also other what sound like silly reasons. So spite and anger and hatred between certain families would make more powerful families block the nationality from less powerful families. We've heard of a case where a husband got mad at his wife and he refused to register their firstborn for the nationality, and the kid ended up stateless. So there are very serious reasons. There are other very trivial reasons, but the end result is all of the same dire level. So statelessness in the Gulf is different. It's not a result of war. And most stateless people, all stateless people, say, for example, in Kuwait and in the Gulf, are of the exact same roots that nationals or the citizens are from. And this is where it becomes very complicated. We have the same roots, we all speak the same language, we have the same religion, and we all look the same. So it's very difficult to tell people apart because of the fact that we all, at the end of the day, come from the same roots. For the longest time, if we're going to take Kuwait as an example, for the longest time, the stateless, and we call them Bidoon. Bidoon means without. So it references without nationality. That's what the reference is. And for the longest time, they were actually treated as Kuwaiti citizens. They were issued passports, they were given scholarships, they were treated in every aspect as citizens. And for the longest time, get this, the Kuwaiti army was 80% Bidoon, stateless people. Some of them actually were recruited particularly for the job. So Kuwait would call on people from other areas just to join the army, and joining as stateless people, but actually, serving the army. Some of the private security of the emir, the two emirs past, were all stateless. So they were in the center. They were holding very sensitive positions and very close to the ruling family, and just a very much integrated part of the Kuwaiti society. The situation continued as such until 1986. 1986 was a sensitive year for Kuwait. It saw a bit of struggle with the Iraqi neighbor, and Kuwait started being uncomfortable, fidgeting a bit with the situation of Bidoon, and thought, okay, maybe it's time we deal head on with the situation. And so the government issued a document that was a secret at that time. It's not secretive, it's not high security document anymore, that said the way to combat this is to pressure the stateless through a prevention of rights. So pressure them in their own rights, like health services, schools. They've pushed all children out of government schools, made them join private schools. Of course, these private schools were lower in level, in academic level, cheaper schools. And because Kuwait signed treaties that compelled it to educate children born on its land, Kuwait had to fund these children. So it's kind of like taking them out of government schools where they were studying for free and putting them in private schools, and then funding their education because they had to do that pending the treaties that Kuwait signed. There was pressure with jobs. They stopped being able to get scholarships or joining Kuwait University. It became really dire. The situation was deteriorating. It became even worse after the invasion of Kuwait and then the liberation of Kuwait. A strong, I would call it semi-governmental, rumors started circulating that all the stateless people in Kuwait actually crossed borders during the invasion. They're mostly illegal residents who just crossed borders illegally after 1990, which is absolutely a big lie, if you will. And so the 90s saw dire deterioration. The first 10 years of the 2000s was really, really hard until 2012, when demonstrations started amongst the stateless. They have reached the third or fourth generation by then. Those younger people are different. They think differently. They don't have the tolerance of their parents. And so they started demonstrations. And this is when we joined in these demonstrations. There was a good movement. We at that time, myself and a few other women coined a group called Group 29. We called it 29 after Article 29 in the Kuwait Constitution that calls for equality between people. And we demonstrated with other humanitarian groups at KU, demanding that they admit Bidoon students into the university. And so we achieved that in 2012. Things started looking up a little bit. However, that was for a very short period of time. And it was just to calm things down, and they started deteriorating again. One reason for the deterioration of the situation is the fact that the way the country, Kuwait, and other Gulf states are trying to solve the problem. And it's very much reminiscent of the way Europe tried to solve the problem in the early 20th century, though through different methods. What I'm trying to say is that the philosophy is the same. If you try to make the problem go away without looking at it logically and without studying the subject psychologically, because you are dealing with human beings at the end of the day, you can't treat them in bulk and you can't think of them as mass. These are human beings. And for Gulf countries, particularly, that lack in number of citizens, this is wealth. And if you can't think of it this way, then you are unable to truly solve the problem. So, for example, Kuwait and other Gulf states started advertising the idea of buying passports. It encouraged These countries encouraged the stateless people to buy passports, even if they're forged passports, even if they're not real passports. And it promised them that if they bought passports and actually got, even if it was not real, nationality, then this is a step ahead towards naturalizing them in Kuwait and other Gulf states. Of course, this backfired because the governments of the states never meant to really naturalize anyone. It just wanted to trick them. So these stateless people now have forged passports that they cannot renew at their respective embassies, because of course the embassies know that these are forged passports. And when they go back to the Kuwaiti government, the institution that it assigned for the issue in Kuwait, it's called the central system. The name is scary, I think, the central system. But when they go back to the central system says, sorry, you're not stateless anymore. Now you are illegal residents with passports. So the government kind of tricked them to fall into that. For the past maybe about 8 to 10 years, the government started doing something else. Now they've stopped the passports because it backfired on everyone. And now they're assigning nationality to people and forcing them to sign off on them. If you want to renew your civil ID, if you want to get your papers, if you want to register your kids at school, if you want to get any kind of service in the country, then you have to sign off on the nationality that the central system will assign to you. And of course, people are resisting that, and it's becoming so complicated and nasty on many levels. Such strange and twisted solutions, quote unquote, created strange and twisted situations. And this applies to all the Gulf countries, again, not just Kuwait. The thing about Kuwait is that we are loud. We have a level of democracy, we have a functioning parliament, and so we're able to raise our voice and actually speak freely and daringly about the subject. We are able to criticize our government, we are able to criticize our prime minister and go home safely at night. Other Gulf countries, it's not always the same. And so the issue of statelessness is very much hushed in other Gulf countries. In Kuwait, it's louder, not because the situation is more dire, but because we are louder and because we have that level of freedom. However, now the situation became extremely intense and very much complicated. So another aspect of it that added to the problem is that Kuwaiti women until today, it's really shameful to admit this, do not pass their nationality to their children. And so all children belong to the fathers. Again, we have to keep in mind that these are very much patriarchal, tribal at heart societies. Most of the laws are drawn on the idea of the male bloodline. So it's really difficult to look at these laws and find, crack to bring the situation into complete modernity, complete civility. And so because a lot of Kuwaiti women, because all Kuwaiti women who are married to either foreigners or stateless are unable to apply for citizen for their children, of course, with one exception, if the husband dies or if they get a final divorce, a divorce whereupon they can never get back together, because under Islamic law, a couple is allowed 3 divorces and then they're unable to get together again and unable to enter marriage again. And so it's you either the husband either has to be dead or out of the picture, divorced from the wife, so that she can apply for nationality for her children. This pushed a lot of families to get legal divorces but stay together under Islamic Sharia law contracts. Which is a very dangerous situation, because in the eyes of the Kuwaiti law, they're adulterous, and adultery is punishable in Kuwaiti law. And so the situation became very complicated. A lot of young Bidoon who have finished until high school, because Kuwait has to fund them until high school, of course, not without struggle, because although Kuwait funds the major fees, there are always extra fees that are really, really difficult for the families. And so we have to help with this every year and try to cover student fees. But those who make it to graduate from high school, whereas for our children, it's the beginning of life, to them, it's basically the end, because it's very difficult to join. KU only has less than 100 seats for Bidoon, and it's decreasing by the minute. Very difficult regulations for them to join the university. And those who make it to KU, when they graduate, if they have not signed off on a nationality, they don't get their degree, they don't get their certificate. If they get their certificate, then they don't get a job. So it's like just climbing a very steep hill. It's extremely difficult, very steep hill for them. The health situation is a bit more stable. Kuwait provides health services for everyone, not with more expensive treatments like cancer treatments and things like that are not all covered, but mostly they get health treatment. But jobs are difficult, education is difficult, buying something to your name is difficult, driving your car safely in the street is difficult because you just don't have any identification. Is the current situation with the Bidoon now. Recently, we had increasing number of, this is one of the major problems we've suffered recently, which is the increasing number of suicide amongst the Bidoon. One of the later cases was a boy of 11 who actually hung himself in his room to the ceiling, to a fan in the ceiling. and he hung himself because apparently his father could not cover his expenses, and he felt like he's a burden on the family. Again, this is terrifying to hear, but we are glad at least we are able to talk about it and voice it. In other Arab countries, Gulf countries, this is unvoiceable. People are not really able to talk about this dire situation. It is only getting worse. We've been meeting with government officials when we can. We've been meeting with NGOs from all around the world. We've been voicing the situation as activists. And currently, I have a new group that I'm working with. It's called Platform for Bidoon, and the platform and other uh, lawyers and MPs and constitutional experts, we sat together and we coined a law. We put together a legislation, and we've submitted this to MPs in the parliament, hoping to pass. We were countered by a terrible, terrible law by the Speaker of the Parliament, who is actually trying to legalize the actions of the central system, what they're doing now, legalizing the forcing of a nationality on people and forcing them to sign off on it. As a result of all of that, in Kuwait, I should have started with this, we have about 100, the number that is usually spoken of is about 120,000 stateless in Kuwait. Most of them now live in poverty. They're very capable people. A lot of them are educated, but the system kind of impoverished them, threw them into terrible psychological pains, terrible social situations, economic situations. Uh, they are isolated from the Kuwaiti community out in remote areas. So there is kind of a ghettoing of the stateless. There is an advertisement of the idea of, oh, they are illegal residents, they've jumped the borders, they're hiding their papers. And you hear people repeating these sentences without even understanding where these sentences came from and how they were coined. I often ask people, when you say they tore off their papers, what do you see in your mind? Like, what's the picture you see in your mind? Because you're just repeating sentences and you're not really even aware of what's happening. Of course, mostly the category that pays the highest price would be women and children. And needless to say, in conservative tribal societies like ours, women are at the bottom of the hierarchy. So stateless women suffer like no other category, truly. Not only do they suffer under oppressive governmental regulations and no identity, and but they also suffer under conservative families that also puts pressure on them. We assume that there are cases of suicide amongst female stateless that we do not hear of, we don't know of. The Mostly, if they get educated and can get a job, the best they can get is a nanny at a nursery, even if she has an MA, for example. It's the situation is dire for these women. The pressure is on, and it's getting worse by the day. The current situation is that we're fighting now to pass a law in the parliament. We have two major problems in that. The first one is that the public is against us. So most of Kuwaiti people have a reaction towards naturalization because of past very negative experiences with naturalization. There was a lot of forgery. There were a lot of malpractices with naturalization that actually made Kuwaiti people very much against the word, and they immediately got suspicious when they hear someone is naturalized for, I mean, for not very good reasons, but also for some good reasons. The second problem that we always face is transparency. You will find that activists in the field of statelessness in the Gulf and in the Arab world do not have information. So if you ask me anything now, I'll tell you, to the best of my knowledge, but it's never numbers. It's never real information. It's never absolutely confirmed. I mean, that's one reason I don't have a PowerPoint, because I don't have really solid subject or solid information to present. Not only is there lack of transparency, but there is actually an intended manipulation of information. So you hear something today, and just tomorrow it would be something else, and then you would announce something, and then a governmental official would come out and say, "Oh, you're wrong, you're lying," and then they would provide a proof. So they use this to kind of find the activists and their struggle in the situation. Um, um, we have to remember that statelessness has many faces. So the Rohingya are stateless. The Uyghur in China are stateless. You have statelessness in the United States. There are still very much stateless people in Europe and South America. And these are forgotten people because um, despite the fact that nationality is a very problematic modern concept, it is one way of further dividing people. We have to admit that. It's the best that humanity can come up with in terms of organization, but it is a further system to divide people. We were long divided by religion, by roots, by color, by other trivial matters, and now we are divided by nationality. In the 20th century, there came about a very kind of ideal and dreamy idea of the international citizen. I actually just finished translating a very important Harvard publication. I have to remember the title of the book that narrates the history of um, statelessness in the world, and it talked particularly about this issue, how humans at a certain time in the 20th century dreamed of the concept of the international citizen, and how this failed miserably because patriotism held people by the throat, and people fell in cracks and were never really able to find their way, never really were able to find their way back. However, all of this being said, today, in today's modern world, the only representation of the individual in the international world is a government, and you only get a government if you have a nationality. So that's the problem. You have 12 million people without representation in the world, without protection, without security, without a constant source of food, and without a liable system of protection. It is just horrendous to think that this is happening in the 21st century, but it is happening. Now, the world agreed, the United Nations agreed on 2024 as the year to end statelessness. We are at 2022 and we still have high numbers of stateless people. So I don't know how the world is going to go about this, but it's time to face the harsh music and really take the matter by its throat, and look at how far our species went, and think about how proud we are of our civilizations, of the level of human rights coining that we've achieved, of our advanced ideas of equality and justice and all of that. And we have to solve this problem. People need to be protected under governments, under certain nationalities. People need to have representation in the international world, or we need to just come up with a whole new system. And I'm going to stop here and maybe take questions if anyone has any.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Alkhateeb. I think that was a wonderful presentation. I really appreciate a lot of the topics and concepts that you explored. I would love to explore some more of those things, such as the patriarchal nature of how this disproportionately discriminates against women, the connection to other societies and what statelessness looks like around the world. You mentioned I think you used the phrase, this is the best that humanity can come up with in my mind. And in my mind, I'm thinking this is probably the best that, people who hold power in our world has come up with. And I'm sure there are better models and want to explore that some more too. But we have a question already in the chat, and I will encourage other people to submit your questions in the Q&A so we explore those concepts and see where the conversation goes. So the first question that came in says, I am in the process of tailoring a syllabus for a course on human development or lack thereof in an Arab world with a focus on Kuwait. What foundational readings in English on the Bidoon issue do you recommend?
Yeah, that's also one problem that we face is the scarcity and lack of actually written material, both in Arabic and in English. Now, in the recent years, we've had a few dissertations actually written on the subject. Maybe one or two books, but not translated in English. But for the person who is asking the question, please pass to them my email or my phone number, and we can get in touch through WhatsApp or email. And if I have sources, I'll certainly pass them your way.
Yeah, thank you. We'll be sure to pass along that information. So we have a couple of additional questions here. The first is, thanks, Dr. Ebtehal. Can you tell us more details about the Bedoon in the context after 10 years of 10 years of 2011 protests? Thanks.
Yeah. The protests resonated strongly, and they were also coincided with the Arab Spring, the time of the Arab Spring, and so the whole area was boiling, and the Bidoon reacted to the regional situation, but also to their own dire situation within. Upon these demonstrations, the public got to understand a little bit more about the Bidoon. In the past, they didn't, before these demonstrations, there was really darkness, lack of information. And as much as we tried to talk about them, I had people come up to me and say, oh, how do they look like? What language do they speak? And I'm like, they're just exactly the same as us. They speak our language, they have our religions, and they look like us. But that kind of ghettoing created that. These demonstrations brought the community a little closer. A lot more Kuwaiti people are involved now. We attend the demonstrations regularly with the Bidoon community. In terms of the reaction of the government, it promised to grant them what it called the 11 benefits, something to the sort, and they're not benefits, they're basic human rights actually, which started to deteriorate after a little while as time went by. So in all, nothing really solid came out of this. The late Emir of Kuwait gave clear instructions that he wants the issue of statelessness to end in Kuwait, and so this brought the situation back into the surface. Upon which we provided the law that I spoke of, our suggestion of a legislation, and the speaker of the parliament countered with what I believe is a terrible law as well. And now there are a number of laws that are being submitted in the parliament. We're trying to pass one of these. Meanwhile, we're trying to ask for at least the courts to be involved, because as of now, the courts are not involved. The jurisdictional system all is not involved in matters of nationality. They say the government is saying it's a matter of sovereignty and the courts cannot get into it. So we're trying to also clear out what sovereignty means and how uh, the courts and the law should be involved in the situation. So we're still struggling. From my perspective, it feels like we didn't move much. Maybe someone outside the circle can see better, but for me, it's static still.
Yeah, thank you for providing that answer. You talked about a variety of things again that I would love to explore more. The notion of you know uh, not having enough information about this population, or not being able to share concrete information. As someone who works in libraries, we have been absolutely exploring this notion of how information is being controlled, how people even provide fake information and disinformation in order to continue to oppress others, among other things. And we can recognize how activism can feel like you're not making a lot of progress, and would be interested to know if other people feel the same or different around that very topic too. So the next question is, thanks for this important presentation. How frequent is it for Bidoon to seek asylum abroad? I know a substantial number have come to the UK in recent years.
Excellent question. I should have spoken about this. Thank you for bringing the issue to mind. Yes, we've had a considerable number seeking asylum. Now, Kuwait is a bit sensitive about this issue because not just Kuwait, all Gulf countries, because people, if they get asylum in quieter areas, and I'm not going to mention them for sensitivity of the situation, then it's okay with the governments of the Gulf area. But if they seek asylum, say in UK or in Canada, which are where the two most hospitable areas for the stateless, the Gulf countries become a bit wary of that, because then those people go there, build lives, and start talking about the situation, and this is not very welcomed. As of now, after the Syrian displacement and the dire situation also of the Syrian refugees that kind of swamped through Europe, it became the UK became less tolerant and hospitable of the stateless. The regulation became a lot more harsh to try and help people. So I have young students who are trying to get asylum there. We have a number of families that are still hanging. Canada is also less tolerant now. But yeah, we have had people trying to seek asylum and migrate. However, it is extremely difficult. I mean, this is a very human thing, and these are people who come from tribal, large families, communities. These are people who are used to living in big households with a lot of family, and to leave and live in areas where they are alone. They don't speak the language, they don't know the culture, they're very conservative and very open cultures. It becomes extremely difficult. I've had a family who contacted me from a country in Europe, and the husband was telling me that the wife is threatening suicide if he does not bring her back to Kuwait. And I keep telling them, hold on, just keep holding on. A lot of families were torn apart by these by the attempt to leave, because half of the family would stay, half would migrate, and those who seek asylum outside would affect the ones inside negatively. The government would take a stand against them. Um, a lot of young people try to leave, but they're not allowed passport. I've had a student who for about maybe 6 or 7 years had very prestigious scholarship in the UK, and the government won't let him leave. Finally, we got him there, or he got himself actually there, but it was a very difficult journey for him. So it's extremely difficult. It's not as doable as it used to, and it's not easy for those conservative kind of community-like families that go there and live extreme harsh situations for them. I do want to tell you about one example. We've had a very important writer, novelist, who is Bidoon, stateless, um, who migrated to Canada, and just a few years. I mean, he's an amazing writer. I'm trying to remember his name because I don't want it to go without mentioning. Uh, that's Nasser al-Dhafiri. His name is Nasser al-Dhafiri, and he died in Canada at a very young age, and I'm sure of a broken heart. I mean, once he migrated there, it was, I don't know, a couple of years later that he actually died. And it was extremely strange to see the I don't know, the carnival, the group that was holding his casket, or the body, and going to bury him. They're all walking in the snow, right? And it's a bunch of tribal Bedouin guys, wonderful bride. I mean, Bedouin in the sense of being tribal, being very much from the Gulf, because they all his friends and people, the community that lives there, are burying him. So they're all very much Gulf, very much tribal, um, very much Kuwaiti, supposedly belong to Kuwait, belong to the Gulf, and they're carrying him in the snow. And it was an agonizing idea to think this man, a man of the desert, a son of the desert, is now buried in snow. I mean, I know it doesn't make sense, but the community suffered through this. The irony of this, the irony of a man who is very much, who wanted to live in the desert and die in the desert. He is a man of the desert, now carried on the shoulders of other tribal men or other Arab men, and being buried in the snow, buried in isolation. Again, live diaspora and die in diaspora, and just agonizing. The view was agonizing. There was a sense to us, people of the East, people of the Middle East, snow is fun and beautiful, but it's strange. It's not our community, and to see him buried in snow was terrifying somehow, was isolating. Yeah.
Yeah, again, thank you for providing that answer. Yeah, someone asked about your contact information, which was just added to the chat, and I believe once we send out information about the recording, we will also include that there. But you know, what you were saying, this notion of you know, there were pathways to seek citizenship in other countries, particularly in the UK, but it's something to remember of. You know, people are leaving their homes and they shouldn't have to, right? People shouldn't have to face this level of discrimination from where they are. They should have the environment and the promises of all the citizens and should be able to have access to that. And this notion of having to go to a foreign place just to continue to experience different forms of discrimination, right? You know, you touched on it, but then even we don't have a chance to dive deeper into what xenophobia look like in the UK and what it looks like in other parts of the world, and what that can do to people too. Is really it's unacceptable, right? And so it's definitely something for us to continue to consider as we want to fight for the rights of the Bidoon and making sure that they have access to basic human rights like everyone else should.
Yes.
Yeah. The next question we have here is, how might countries offer a better path to citizenship for stateless people?
How my countries, or how may countries? Maybe?
Yeah. How might countries? So what can countries do that have stateless people or Bidoon? What can they do to offer a better path to citizenship for stateless people?
Okay, you got cut off a bit, but I'm
sorry.
assuming that no, that's okay. It's probably the service. So, how can countries create a better path? That's okay. The question. So, if I want to speak for Kuwait, for example, um, the solutions are there. It's just we need the willpower to take a step and start solving. So, for example, women should be able to pass their nationality to their children. Very obvious in the 21st century. Am I can you hear me? Good. Okay. So one way of solving this problem is through just giving women the natural right in the 21st century in a modern state of passing her nationality to her children. That's one thing. We also have a governmental census of 1965, upon which it recognizes all people who are mentioned in the 1965 census as citizens, supposedly, or as deserving of the nationality. And so you can immediately naturalize people in the 1965 census and get that community also over. There are people who have done services to the country, people who are in the army, people who serve the country in different aspects, and these also deserve immediate nationality. The rest of it, one of the things that we've suggested is what a number of countries have also practiced, which is what we call path of naturalization. Path of naturalization is for people who are, say, for example, less eligible for the nationality, but you give them time. So you tell them in 10 years, you have to do 1, 2, 3, 4. You have to, I don't know, get educated, get rooted, learn the language, stabilize your situation, and also provide them the means to do all of that. When they achieve this in 10 or 15 years, for example, then, or say 10 years, I say 10 to 15 because that sounds short for us in the Gulf countries. That's how long it takes to even be eligible. Then those people would live with hope. They would work on bettering their situation instead of resorting to absolutely giving up and depression and ending up suicidal. And at the same time, you create better citizens, future citizens, and also, give them, you equip them that even if they don't get naturalized in Kuwait, they can get naturalized somewhere else. In Gulf states that lack people, we in Kuwait, we have currently 5 million people. Only about 1.5 million are Kuwaitis. The rest are expats. So we are a minority in our country. You need citizens, and those are ready people. They've lived all their life here. They speak your language. They practice your religion. They're absolutely, they come from your same traditions, background, culture. They're ready. And so give them hope and create a path of naturalization, whereupon you give yourself time to get ready for more citizens, and at the same time give them the chance to better their situation.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for the answer. As you were describing that, I was thinking of a lot of similarities of what the citizenship process looked like in the United States, and what certain demographics have faced in terms of discrimination in their pathway to citizenship. You know, I'm thinking about enslaved Africans during the slavery era, where this notion of people joining the military as a pathway to citizenship. I'm also thinking about undocumented people who are coming in from Latin America, and a lot of conversations around what those pathways look like too, which and trying to streamline those processes seem to be in alignment with some of the things that you all are advocating for in terms of what can be done in this situation. So it's interesting. You know, we have a ton of questions, so I don't know if we get to the topic, but I would love to learn more, you know, around what coalition building looks like in an international level, and how we can continue to raise this awareness to essentially, you know, create better pathways to citizenship and, you know, again, having access to basic human rights globally. Okay, so the next question, it seems to two different pieces came in, so I'm going to connect them because it looks like they're connected there. The first portion says, though the world stateless issue is so painful, allow me to talk and concentrate on the Kuwait Saudi stateless Bidoon, which it seems to me both countries are not too serious to solve it. Can't both countries, Kuwait and Saudi Arabia, split the number of stateless people in half and finish off the issue?
Okay, well, Kuwait and Saudi Arabia are have very long borders between them, and they share a lot of the culture, and a lot of the or a number of the stateless in Kuwait have Saudi roots. I'm sure they have some of the Kuwaitis living there as well, but it's not as simple as dividing numbers. Again, we have to remember that it's a matter of people who are rooted in the areas that they live in. And with Easterners, there is strong connection to the land because there is strong connection to the roots and the bloodline and where the tribe was and where, I mean, some people have even loyalties to their small areas, which are, you know, a few kilometers. So it's difficult to uproot people as such. Supposedly Kuwaitis and Saudis are not very different. I mean, people in Kuwait should be naturalized, and people who are currently in Saudi Arabia should just be naturalized, and that's the logical answer to this, as opposed to divide numbers and then you have to push people from Kuwait to Saudi Arabia or push people from Saudi Arabia to Kuwait when the two countries are very similar and on great terms, and it doesn't seem necessary to take that step.
Thanks again. And you know, what you proposed, you were like, this is the logical answer. And I want to connect that back to what you were saying in your presentation of, you know, the way that we've created just our borders, our countries, nationalities. You know, this was the best that we can do as a human race. And, you know, I had mentioned that, you know, this is the best that people in power can do, right?
Oh,
because
absolutely.
What you were saying, of course, is a logical step of what we can do to end oppression for certain communities and certain groups of people. And what is being done is illogical. You know, it's people who are leaning into misinformation to a point where they don't even know what they were believing in. So you were providing an example of people were asking you, what does Bedoon look like? What do they sound like? And you were like, they're us, right? We come from the same cultural roots. So it's very interesting of you know, these caste systems and forms of repression that we've created arbitrarily. So you know, I appreciate your thoughts on this topic. So the next question is, you know, thank you, Dr. Alkhateeb, for this edifying presentation. I very much admire the work you are doing. I am curious, though, in your opinion, what percentage of the population is Bedoon in Kuwait in the Gulf as a whole?
Yeah, we don't have, again, that's one weakness that we suffer from, is that we don't have clear numbers. I can tell you we have about 120,000 in Kuwait, maybe a similar number in the United Emirates. Um, uh, Maybe slightly larger number in Saudi Arabia, slightly lower number in Qatar and Bahrain. But I can't tell you that I have information. I mean, I barely know the number of Kuwait because, again, none of this is made public. Kuwait is the only country that has some officials speak about this, and it's barely enough information to work with. We can't see any legal papers. We're not offered any documents. Um, uh, the official number often told in Kuwait or announced in Kuwait is 120,000. We think it's larger than this because a lot of people do not announce themselves, are totally off the grid and just hidden, which is again a very, very dangerous situation for the people to begin with and for the country, particularly in a country the size of Kuwait and with the population of Kuwait. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Thank you for adding that. And remember, you talking about that as a part of your presentation. So yeah, it's a very challenging situation because it's difficult for people to be forthright around their identity and their status because of the type of repression that they will face. So it's really difficult to get an accurate number there. Our next question, would it not be in the interest of the Kuwaiti state to resolve this social problem and integrate the Bidoon? Why does the government resist so much to this?
You would think. Yeah. You know, I get asked this question over and over again, and I always look like an idiot when I try to answer because I really don't know what to say. It is in no one's interest that the situation is continuing, at least not very clearly. And now it's a source of extended corruption. The Bidoon are used as a political card. So MPs sometimes play the card, government sometimes play the card. Um, they're used, sometimes the Bidoon community is introduced as Kuwaiti citizens. The people are introduced as Kuwaiti citizens when the government wants them to be counted towards oil income and the equation of oil. I'm not sure how this runs. Then other times they are illegal residents. And there is, at this point, I would tell you, it is a political card played every now and then. So sometimes if the government wants to pressure the MPs, they would promise them to vote on a certain law. They would promise them, I would naturalize 20 people for you. These will be your future votes if you vote this way. And so they would play that card. But mostly right now, it became just a personal issue with the government. It's so strange. Like you feel that the Gulf countries are treating the situation with spite, as if it's animosity embedded in the situation. And because the public opinion is also against, it's very difficult to get the situation moving when the people are against. And so, of course, there is also the economy. The government keeps saying that naturalizing those people would pressure the country. The country can't, particularly a country like Kuwait, where it's a wealthy small state. It's beneficial. The benefits supposedly are high for the citizens. And so, these are all illegal residents that are crossing here to benefit from the Kuwaiti citizenship. It's interesting that our current institution, governmental institution dealing with the situation is called the Central System for the treatment of the situation of illegal residents. And we have a law for illegal residents. I mean, we have a residency law and illegal residence law that you can use to solve the problem. But you can't use it on the stateless because you can't deport them anywhere. You can't put them in prison. You can't do anything. They are actually stateless. And so we also have that dilemma lingering. And it's a great question. And I always end up like total idiot when I try to answer it because I have no answer. It's just prejudices, deeply rooted prejudices with the corruption, uh, c- co- hand in hand with corruption. Um, Important thing is to not forget that these are again um, deeply patriarchal, tribal societies. Bloodline is very important. Your roots are very important. Where you come from is very important. My family came 300 years ago from Iran, so my roots are Farsi, Iran. Um, uh, I get harassed by this every now and then. My ancestors came 300 years ago to Kuwait, but I still get called Farsi, sometimes Safawi, referencing my roots, and I'm not looked at as very original, pure blood as other Kuwaitis. So it's not, yeah. Just getting the citizen does not make you a real Kuwaiti. It doesn't work like this.
Wow. Wow. Yeah, thank you for adding that. So we have a few minutes left before we get into the wrap up phase. So I'm going to ask the next two questions together to see if we have time to get those addressed. So do you know of any Bidoons being deported from the US or the EU? You was just talking about the notion of in Kuwait you can deport the Bidoon anyway. So I'd be interested to hear your response there. And have you seen any progress towards addressing statelessness in other Arab countries and the Middle East that you would like to see replicated in the Kuwaiti government?
Yeah. Um, I'm not sure I get the first question. Are they deported from Kuwait or from the US and the
So
UK?
it sounds
Both are
like,
seeking.
yeah, it sounds like if someone has left to seek asylum somewhere else, someone who left Kuwait to the EU or to the US, are we seeing Bidoons being deported from, let's say, the US
Back.
back to Kuwait?
Yes, there are cases where some families were returned. There are cases of Bidoon actually getting stuck in deportation prison because they put them in prisons awaiting to be displaced or deported. I'm sorry, to some other countries, and they would spend. We had a case in Australia that was in prison for years before they knew what to do with him, young guy. So yes, we've have cases, back and forth. We know cases who went and were able to settle, and cases that had to be sent back. Experiences or other Gulf countries solutions. We hear of other Gulf countries solutions. We're not quite sure about their details nor about the validity, again, because of the lack of transparency. I'm worried to say I like these solutions because I don't know much about them, even if they look glittery from the outside. Now, there are some countries that it's a legal process whereupon you buy nationality. They call them economic nationality. You put an amount of money in the bank accounts of these stateless people, and then certain countries would agree to naturalize them because of the amount of money they have, whereupon they would add to the wealth of the country and kind of from business in these countries. It's a legal process. I think some Gulf countries tried to seek that. I'm not sure how it ended. Again, lack of information. I'm uncomfortable with all of these solutions unless it's naturalization and rehabilitation of these people in their respective countries, and treating them with respect and providing all human rights. I don't see uh, other ways of, or at least permanent residency until their children and grandchildren are born in the country, and then they should be treated as citizens. I mean, this is another way. Just let generations fade away. Sadly, I have to say, but that's another way of doing it. There are hush-hush solutions in other Gulf countries. We don't know much about them, and because they're hush-hushed, I'm not very comfortable with them.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you again. Yeah, you hit on an important topic of how, at the end there, you were talking about, when your children are born, your grandchildren are born, and how different countries in the world establish citizenship, some through bloodline, some through birthplace. So you were born in a particular country, then you automatically get citizenship there. And so interesting concepts to explore more. So we are going to stop here so we can transition over to the wrap up portion. But I want to thank you again, our guest speaker, because I think that what you're sharing is very important information that our colleagues here who have joined us today should know, and hopefully, we can use this information to continue to elevate this issue so people can talk about it more and the advocacy can increase. So thank you again, and I will turn it over to Magda.
Thank you very much, Dr. Ebtehal. This was really wonderful knowledge for us where we were not aware of the deepening of these issues. And I really appreciate you coming to talk to us